Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks for listening, and thanks for joining us. Just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you in advance for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. January 22nd marks the 45th anniversary of the infamous Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that has led to the murders of approximately 60 million American citizens. Well, because January is Pro-Life Month, we're devoting several podcasts to the subject of abortion in America. Our January gift offer also relates to the subject of abortion. But I'll tell you more about that at the end of the podcast. But for now, let's join Dr. Dave Schnichter for today's program.
Greetings, friends. Welcome to another Last Days Beacon podcast. Our purpose in these programs is to help equip you as a last day saint. We have been doing a series of podcasts on the pro-life issue. In light of the 45th anniversary of the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that has resulted in the slaughter of approximately 60 million American citizens. During one of the presidential debates, Donald Trump said, quote, "With what Hillary is saying, in the 9th month, you can take the baby and rip the baby out of the womb of the mother just prior to the birth of the baby. Now you can say that's okay, and Hillary can say that's okay, but that's not okay with me." End of quote. He followed up those sentiments and remarks he made on January 19, 2018, when he addressed the massive March for Life rally via satellite broadcast. During his remarks, Trump voiced his support for a federal ban on all abortions after 20 weeks gestational age, actively calling on the Senate to vote on the measure. This bill, called H.R. 36, has already passed the House and is awaiting action in the Senate. By the way, 20-week abortion bans is already the law in 17 states in the United States. Please call your U.S. Senator and urge him to pass House Bill H.R. 36 in the Senate. We finally have a president who is working to end abortions in America. Let's work with him, shall we? While much of the focus of the pro-life community has been on the overturning of Roe v. Wade, there are other pro-life issues before the courts as well. We're going to talk about one of those issues before the courts right now, and I'm privileged to be joined on the broadcast today by William J. Olson, who heads a law firm by the same name in the Washington, D.C. area. Bill is not only a constitutional attorney who has brought dozens of cases to the Supreme Court, but he is also a personal friend and a member of the Advisory Council of Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Bill, welcome to the program today.
Well, thank you, David. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, it's great to have you with us again. You've done some other programs with us in the past, but for those who weren't privileged to hear those and don't know of you and the work that you are involved in, tell us about your law firm and give us some of your website addresses.
Well, we have a law firm of 5 lawyers. We're located in Vienna, Virginia, Northern Virginia near Washington, and another office in Winchester. And one of the partners who works on these matters is Herb Titus, who many people know as a former founding dean of Regent Law School, taught constitutional law for 25 years, and is the author of God, Man, and Law. And so we have some good backup in our firm to be able to do constitutional law from a very much a textual and originalist perspective. And we have a website for our firm, which is Law and Freedom. Strangely enough, it's not the name of our law firm, but when it was available, I took it. It's lawandfreedom.com, and we have up there a couple of hundred briefs that we filed, about 130 or so in the U.S. Supreme Court and others all around the country, so people can see and then look for things on abortion or LGBTQ agenda or whatever the issue is they might be interested in.
Now, you have another website as well that you maintain on the side with all of your abundance of spare time. Tell our listeners about this website.
We decided last year to create another website because so many of the search engines and the common social media sites were censoring Christian and conservative websites that we thought we would make our effort to promote groups all over the country. And so we've created a website called biblicalgrid.com. And Biblical Grid has categories of all sorts. It has, I think, over 350 or so websites that are promoted on that site. Whether it be U.S. politicians that are worth following, Christian commentators, Bible tools, but mostly Christian ministries and those who are standing for the faith. And so even if Facebook won't show them in a result, or Google or Twitter censors them, we like to try to promote them. And so we're just doing our little part to get the word out on that website, biblicalgrid.com.
And for those who forget that name, you can go to SWPM.us and the biblicalgrid.com. The link to that is on our homepage. And we are glad to have that link to so many wonderful websites and YouTube channels featured right on our homepage. This is truly an information war, and we want to mobilize as many of these great ministries and informational sites. And Bill has done a tremendous job of noting, posting, and maintaining this website, thebiblicalgrid.com. That's my little free advertisement, because our humble website is one of your featured, and our YouTube channel, last I checked, is still on the biblicalgrid.com.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons we did this.
Well, we have to work together in the Lord's work. We have many enemies, and we need to stand together, or as they say, we will all hang separately.
Yep.
Well, let's get down to the business at hand. You are arguing a brief before the infamous Ninth Circuit Court, which I believe is on the left coast. Tell our readers briefly about this brief that you are arguing.
Well, this case originated in a law passed by the California legislature with the support of our very unusual governor out there, Jerry Brown. And
we call him affectionately Governor Moonbeam.
It's him.
That's him.
And it's something called the California Reproductive Fact Act. And as you said, David, not all we're now 45 years out from Roe v. Wade. As a matter of fact, we mentioned in our brief we filed this 6 days short of the 45th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and we decided to expand the fight beyond normal cases. This is a very unusual case because California is not content to allow the crisis pregnancy centers that operate throughout the state unimpeded. It used to be that the states would have an interest in opposing abortion, supporting life. California has now taken the lead to go in the opposite direction, to promote abortion and to oppose life. And specifically what this law does, the California Reproductive Fact Act, is to require that the crisis pregnancy centers in California, which of course their mission is to urge women to have their babies, the law is designed to instruct them to hand out or post pro-abortion literature offering the availability of taxpayer-funded abortions at various state facilities. So in other words, not only is, it would be one thing if they had it as their policy of the state to support death over life, but what's so extraordinary about this case is that they're compelling those who are pro-life in California to give a view that they find to be detestable, sinful, and this whole effort to compel speech by pro-lifers is certainly tyrannical.
Well, Bill, let me ask this in the interest of fairness. Does this Reproductive Fact Act also require the Planned Parenthood centers to carry literature regarding crisis pregnancy centers and also to counsel their prospective clients about the availability of the crisis pregnancy centers in the interest of fairness?
Well, fairness is not very high on the agenda of the California legislature, apparently. The concept that they had in mind, and it's quite extraordinary, was that the crisis pregnancy centers were not telling the truth and that they would decide what the truth was. So rather than having a free marketplace of ideas, and I find this hard enough to believe that people advocate for abortion, but certainly we have 50 million or 60 million dead babies here proving that people do advocate for it. But now they're forcing others to become complicit. I mean, if you're a pro-lifer and you're working at a crisis pregnancy center, and this is all free, by the way, what they do, they're not charging anyone, and now you have to have this big sign posted in multiple languages that offers abortion. It's the reason that the California legislature gave to do that is that, well, this is truth, that people should have all knowledge of their reproductive rights. And so once the state gets in the business of defining truth, we're all in trouble.
Now let me ask this. I'm ignorant. I know California is a very socialistic state. Does the state of California help fund the crisis pregnancy centers?
Oh no, it doesn't fund them. It's not a condition of receiving funds. Rather, they say that this is a restriction on what they call professional speech. And the funny thing is the Supreme Court has never recognized a lower standard of First Amendment review of something called professional speech. But even if they did, this is not a case of professional speech because it's not in the context of, say, a licensed healthcare professional giving advice. It's simply anybody who comes in the office has to see big signs in multiple languages or be handed literature that offers these taxpayer-funded abortions. It's extraordinary.
So the Ninth Circuit has created fiat, a new category of speech called professional speech, which does not enjoy First Amendment rights.
Yes. Well, they say it has a lower standard of First Amendment rights, a less fully protected version of free speech. And that was the view of the district court in California, the view of the Ninth Circuit sitting in California, and then the case has now been elevated to the Supreme Court. We filed a brief last April begging the Supreme Court to take this case. And fortunately they did. And now we filed a brief for the Conservative Legal Defense and Education Fund and a variety of other wonderful groups, groups like Pass the Salt Ministries, Coach Dave Daubenmeier, his group, and Joe Miller of Alaska, his group, Restoring Liberty Action Committee, and Transforming Word Ministries, and a number of groups that wanted to join this, and we got to submit a brief on the merits in the U.S. Supreme Court, urging the Supreme Court to now take action and strike down the ruling of the Ninth Circuit.
How does your understanding of the First Amendment bear upon this issue?
Well, if you believe it doesn't mean what it says, that's a perfectly good interpretation of it, because it can mean whatever the judges think. If the text of these amendments doesn't seem to matter to anyone anymore, when it says Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion, they don't understand what no law means. And the same thing is true about abridging the freedom of speech. Well, no law means no law, and once the First Amendment is incorporated through the 14th Amendment to the states, which is their theory, it should restrict the state, and the state should be able to make no law. This is clearly a law abridging freedom of speech. It's a law requiring compelled speech, which is something that even the Supreme Court has refused to do on many prior cases. But that's where we are.
So the Ninth Circuit has gotten around the First Amendment by creating a new category of speech that is less protected. That is professional speech, I guess, as opposed to amateur speech, which is fully protected.
Well, if it's pro-abortion, it's fully protected. I mean,
yeah.
It's interesting. Over the last 45 years, we've seen that in every case just about that comes up there with respect to abortion, we see the Supreme Court willing to bend all of the rules of construction, rules that otherwise apply in all other kinds of cases. Matter of fact, Justice Scalia wrote a scathing dissent in the case called Stenberg, and he said, he talked about the court's inclination to bend the rules when any effort to limit abortion or even speak in opposition to abortion is at issue. I mean, no one should be under the misapprehension that when the Supreme Court issues an abortion decision, that it is in any way grounded in the text or original meaning of the founders and the framers and in the Constitution. It's just not true. It's all made up. And on our website, by the way, the Law and Freedom website, there's a place on famous quotations, and we put a number of quotations up there as to justices who've said things like, at the constitutional level where we work, we're basically just implementing our own views. And that's, of course, what they're doing. And that means that even if Donald Trump is elected, and even if Donald Trump has a different view, for example, about expanding the exemptions from the Obamacare mandate that employers pay for abortion, and he said if you have a sincerely held religious belief, you can't be compelled to do this. And all of a sudden a district court in Pennsylvania comes along and says, no, I don't like that. So I'm enjoining the person who was elected by the people. I'm one federal judge, holdover from the Obama years, and you're not going to get away with it, Mr. President. Who do you think you are? And this is what's happening with the whole Trump agenda from coast to coast. We've got the judiciary operating as a left-behind army to thwart the president and to nullify the effect of the election.
Isn't this what we call judicial tyranny?
It really is, and the certainly the Christian community has to understand this, because these decisions are simply not worthy of respect. They are certainly not law. Nothing a decision. The First Amendment's very clear that all legislative power is vested in the Congress, not in the court. And whatever ruling a judge comes up with is just worthy of respect only insofar as it makes sense. And the problem is that throughout the country, with very few exceptions, and one of them is, by the way, Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore, who was courageous on this issue for many years. He always said, just because the Supreme Court said it doesn't make it so. And that's why he was such a threat to the people in the establishment, because he denied the doctrine of what's called judicial supremacy, that anything the court does in interpreting the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And interestingly enough, just a few years, the Supreme Court never said that until a case called Cooper v. Aaron in the 50s. And finally they came across that brilliant statement that says that their opinions are the supreme law of the land. And that was only a few years after Justice Frankfurter said exactly the opposite. He says, hey, what's key is what's the text of the Constitution say, not what we say about it. So this was a new and radical doctrine. It was done in the context of civil rights. And the problem is that most people today, you can't find a member of the House, the Senate. You can't find a lower federal court judge. You can scarcely find a state court judge who will not, if asked, believe in the doctrine of judicial supremacy. And the problem is that in America, the people are sovereign, not the courts, not the government. And if you yield sovereignty to the courts, then you wind up killing 60 million babies. You wind up with homosexual marriage. You wind up with insanity. And that's where we are.
Well, why is this brief important to the pro-life movement?
Well, the issue is terribly important. What we tried to do, and what we do in almost all of our briefs, is try to go back to first principles. And interestingly enough, Thomas Jefferson was quite clear about this when he was in the Virginia legislature, and they came up with a bill that was adopted by the Virginia legislature that later led to the First Amendment. And in that bill, we actually quote this in our brief, we say, the opinions of men are not the object of civil government, nor under its jurisdiction, and that you cannot allow a civil magistrate, like a judge, to intrude in the field of opinion. And that's exactly what's happening here. Is an unborn baby life or not life? Well, I guess in the old days we used to believe that God settled these issues, and now, since we live in a world where no one wants to be accountable, we make the decision up ourselves. But the one thing we used to be able to do up until this law was passed was we could dissent. We could refuse to participate. We could disagree. We could go into the free marketplace of ideas and tell people what we thought and see who wins. And now, because they know their arguments are so pathetically poor, they want us to all bow at the altar of judicial supremacy, and they want us to become complicit in their sin. And the question is whether the Christian community is going to do it. There are almost no Christian lawyers in the country who resist the doctrine of judicial supremacy. So most of the organizations that are out there will never take on this issue, and we take it on regularly. So it's not like we're so smart. I just wonder what happened to everybody else.
Let's back up a little bit, because I'm a little bit slow. This California Reproductive Fact Act, is this a state law in California?
Yes, it is, and it only applies within California to the crisis pregnancy centers.
And the Ninth Circuit has upheld the validity of this law.
That's right. It was challenged in federal court as a violation of the First Amendment, and the District Court and the Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit upheld it.
So your argument and your brief, is it being prepared for consideration by the Supreme Court, or are you going back to the Ninth Circuit Court for a reversal?
No, this is in the Supreme Court now. We supported the petition for certiorari, which is how you get Supreme Court review. We supported that last April, and now we just filed a brief a couple of days ago on the merits in the U.S. Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court will decide for the nation as to whether these kinds of laws are constitutional or not. Our view, of course, is it doesn't matter what they decide, because it's still outside the jurisdiction of government to tell us what to think. Matters of opinion are personal, but they don't seem to think so.
And where does it go from here, from a standpoint of, the timetable and even the criteria that might be used as to whether the Supreme Court will actually hear this brief?
Well, they have agreed to hear it, and the briefing has just occurred, and there will be oral argument in I believe, in early March, and then we'll get a decision probably at the end of the term, which will be in May or so. So they're probably going to decide the case this year.
I'm sure that you're going to marshal precedents that will support your position.
Yeah, we did in our brief, and we, there were quite a few briefs filed in this case, and the one distinctive, perhaps, of our briefs is that we always go back to first principles, and secondly, that we regularly cite the Word of God. And, we think that this is a weapon, and we're always amazed when we read these other briefs where people are simply regurgitating prior erroneous Supreme Court opinions and saying, well, please find a way to give us a little bit of a victory. And we go back and matter of fact, one of the things in this case we said is that this is going to be incredibly divisive for the country. It's going to because you're going to find crisis pregnancy centers, I think, and I would hope, that would simply say, nuts, that's your opinion, we're not going to do it. And the problem is that they have, and then we're into the area of $500 fines and $1,000 fines and injunctions, and until the Christian community realizes that the courts are wholly out of control and they support every effort to resist the doctrine of judicial supremacy, we're never going to make progress. We need people to be outraged, and as a matter of fact, in our brief, we discuss the illustration of the Jewish leaders of that day telling the Christians that they could not spread the gospel and could not tell about Jesus and the wonderful things that had happened in Jerusalem, and we cite the 5th chapter of Acts about the notion that it doesn't really matter if they've been commanded not to teach in His name, because the apostles had filled Jerusalem with their doctrine, and what's the response? Of course, that Peter gives: we ought to obey God rather than men. Now, we sort of had a chance to do some of this in the response to the Obergefell decision, but very little resistance occurred. And the resistance that occurred, like by Kim Davis, she was terribly misled, I think, into not objecting to the Obergefell decision, but simply saying, oh, please don't make me participate. Somebody else will sign the forms. A very weak kind of opposition. And here we need people in California and elsewhere to rise up. I mean, at what point will we rise up to defend the Constitution as against the judges?
I think at some point, and I'll just say this ad hoc, that Christians are going to have to be willing to go to jail for some of these issues, such as the his name escapes me. The family in Nevada, Cliven Bundy.
The Bundys. Spent
700 days in jail, he and his 2 sons, because of constitutional issues. Rather than bow the knee to Caesar, they paid that penalty. And another, of course, gentleman in that whole movement was shot dead, cold-blooded murder by federal authorities, Lavoy Finchicum. And so I think with many of these intrusions, Christians are going to have to come to the point where they're willing to go to jail in defending them. What say ye?
Well, I'm sad to say that seems to be where we're headed, and that's what we tried to warn the court about in our brief. And I don't think anyone else did this, but we tried to say, if you're going to try to make people who believe that abortion is murder and that life is given by God and they have no right to urge people to take it, and you're going to sanction them and punish them, you're going to rip apart the society. It's one thing to say these other people can have abortions if they can find a doctor to do it. That's bad enough. I mean, we said in the brief, it's at minimum cultural coarseness. At worst, it leads to God's judgment on the country, on the nation. I mean, nations are judged by God temporally, having no eternal life. We get judged. The greatest threat to America and our existence is God's judgment. But in this case, we've can't. We've always said that it's funny to hear the judges. The judges think that what they're doing is neutral and secular, and that's the right way to do it, that it avoids religion. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, because there always is and must be, as we argue in our brief, that there is going to be an establishment of religion in society. The question is, which religion is going to be established? And what we've decided to do is reestablish neo-paganism, coming out of the Greeks and the Romans, who believed in infanticide, they believed in abortion, they had sexual license, had no concept of opposition to sodomy. I mean, it's extraordinary how and as a matter of fact, Justice Blackmun in Roe v. Wade, the first thing he does, he starts talking about the Greeks and the Romans as precedent for his decision. Why is he talking about them? Are we going to return to a world where we have slaves and where God is ignored? It's just tragic what's happening now, because we are establishing a religion, and the religion is, you could call it secular humanism, you could call it whatever you want, but it is the antithesis of Christianity.
Yeah, this myth of neutrality is used as a cudgel against Christians. We're the ones that are told to sit down, shut up, and now they're even going beyond that, telling us to speak up on behalf of abortion. Otherwise, we are breaking the almighty law. So the rights of conscience are absolutely being destroyed by this. And it seems to me that the outcome of this could have a marked impact on the First Amendment in a whole range of issues.
Well, it's certainly going to, it's certainly going to undermine the First Amendment, and it's going to make it possible for states all over the country to compel Christians to give approval and sanction, and they desperately want this. I mean, homosexuals used to say, just leave us alone, don't prosecute us. And where have we moved from there? Now they want us to celebrate with them and provide the cake for their wedding.
Right. Otherwise, they'll shut us down or put us in jail.
I mean, we're certainly heading toward the day when the courts are going to use occupational licensure laws to ensure that people like me don't practice law, that doctors who won't do abortions don't practice medicine, that people who won't do whatever they tell them to do won't be even electricians or plumbers. They certainly won't be allowed to teach in state-sponsored schools. We're on the opposite side of history. Well, if we're on the opposite side of history, the way history is going, that's a great compliment.
So this artificial construct of professional speech could be used to do exactly what you're describing.
Oh, I think that's where we're headed. And it's going to be like Eastern Europe when the Soviet Union was, prior to their reformation. But in Eastern Europe, if you were not pro-communist, you couldn't be in any of the professions. You couldn't be licensed as in any area. Almost every person in every church was a common laborer. That was the only thing they would allow them to do to make a living, and we're headed there. So the time at some point will have to be to stand up. I don't look forward to what might happen. We tried to warn the court that if they go too far, there will be resistance, there will be disobedience, and I think they have to know that. So we articulated it. They have been warned, and now the question is, what are they going to do?
Well, you're doing a great work, Bill. We do appreciate your efforts, the efforts of your team. I'd like to make our listeners apprised of the location of this brief in case they would like to look at it in further detail themselves. Is this on your website?
It is. It's also up on the lead nonprofit organization that funded it, Conservative Legal Defense and Education Fund, which is cldef.org. And they make many of our briefs possible.
The formal name of your brief for those looking for it on these websites?
Well, it'll be listed under the name of the case, which is National Institute of Family and Life Advocates versus Becerra, or NIFLA, N-I-F-L-A, versus Becerra. It'll be right there. It was filed on January 16th, 2018.
Just a few days ago. Well, Bill, we're about out of time for today. Thanks for joining us on today's program.
Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, God bless you for your work, and I'm going to encourage our listeners to be praying and supporting this effort through your prayers and continued interest. Now, friends, our featured product for this month is a DVD entitled Baby Parts for Sale, an inside look at America's most shocking industry. And I have a copy of this DVD in my hand. This DVD exposes the grisly revenue-enhancing program of Planned Parenthood, and it will answer the question as to why partial birth abortion and infanticide are practiced in Planned Parenthood abortion mills, which, by the way, is contrary to federal law. But, who cares about a few federal laws? Well, this practice needs to be widely exposed until an outraged public forces Congress and the Department of Justice to enforce the law and prosecute the guilty. And now Dane will tell you how you can order a copy of our DVD, Baby Parts for Sale.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Friends, our featured product for the month of January is an excellent DVD entitled Baby Parts for Sale, an inside look at America's most shocking industry. This film investigates the illegal, multi-million-dollar-a-year baby parts trafficking industry, which is one of the most lucrative businesses in operation today. Yet most Americans are unaware of its existence. Many have heard about the controversy surrounding fetal tissue research, but have no idea how the tissue is obtained. To obtain a copy of Baby Parts for Sale, simply go to the homepage of our website, www.swpm.us. That website address again is www.swpm.us. Simply click on the slider at the top of the homepage for this film, and it'll take you directly to our online bookstore. You may acquire the film, Baby Parts for Sale, for a gift of $15.99, plus shipping and handling. The website address again is www.swpm.us. And please join us next week for another Last Days Beacon program brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, this is Dane Rome saying thanks for listening.